The dusty VHS tape shouldn't have existed. It was labeled in shaky, fading handwriting, Clint Eastwood's final Western, never released. The young film archivist, Alex Carter, stared at it, his hands trembling. There was no record of such a film, no script, no news articles, nothing. It was as if Clint Eastwood had made a secret Western and then buried it. As Alex slid the tape into the player, the screen flickered. The grainy footage rolled. A lone cowboy standing in the desert, face hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. Then the voice. That unmistakable, gravelly voice. Some things should have stayed buried, but if you found this kid, you're about to learn the truth. Alex's heart pounded. This wasn't just a lost film. This was a confession. Alex was no conspiracy theorist. He was a graduate student researching Hollywood's lost films. But this was different. He rewound the tape, watching again. The cowboy's hat lifted, revealing Clint Eastwood, older but still commanding. The look in his eyes wasn't just acting. He was telling a story. His story. Alex had to know more. He started digging. First, through old Hollywood archives, then into Clint's unreleased projects. There were rumors, whispers of a final Western that Clint had poured his soul into. A story too real, too raw. But before Alex could piece it together, someone tried to stop him. His emails were erased. His research files vanished. And then the phone call. "Drop the tape, kid. Some things are better left forgotten." A chill ran down Alex's spine. Who didn't want this movie to be found? Alex Carter knew he should have stopped. The warning call wasn't a joke. Someone didn't want Clint Eastwood's lost Western to see the light of day, but that only made him more determined. He had a VHS tape of a movie no one knew existed, a movie starring Clint Eastwood in what seemed to be his last great Western, a film that had never been released, never even mentioned, and if Hollywood had taught him anything, it was this. The most dangerous stories are the ones people try to erase. So he went deeper. Alex had a contact in Hollywood, an old film historian named George Lancaster. If anyone knew about lost films, it was George. When Alex showed him the VHS tape, the old man turned pale. "Where did you get this?" George whispered. "It was buried in an old studio vault. There's no record of this film anywhere." George stared at the flickering screen. The desert landscape. Clint Eastwood standing alone. That haunted look in his eyes. Then came Clint's voice. "There was once a time when a man could make things right, but that time is gone now." George grabbed Alex's arm. "Kid, listen to me. If this is real, you just uncovered one of the biggest Hollywood cover-ups in history." Alex's pulse raced. "What do you mean?" George sighed, rubbing his temples. He had heard whispers of this film before, a project Clint had written, directed, and acted in, a Western that was supposed to be his final masterpiece, a film so personal, so raw, that the studio shut it down. The studio claimed the film was incomplete, but the truth? Clint never wanted it released, because this film wasn't just a Western. George leaned in. His next words shook Alex to his core. This was Clint Eastwood's real-life story, hidden inside a Western plot. Alex sat frozen. If that was true, then this film wasn't just a movie. It was Clint Eastwood's final message to the world, and someone had buried it. Determined to find answers, Alex dug through every Hollywood archive. Then, one night, buried deep inside an old studio storage facility, he found it, an unmarked box covered in dust. Inside, a single yellowed script. Its title? The Last Ride, written by Clint Eastwood. Alex flipped through the pages. The story was about an aging gunslinger named Sam Colton, forced out of retirement for one last showdown. A man haunted by his past mistakes and trying to make peace with the ghosts of his life. And the most shocking part? It was Clint's own life story, disguised as a Western. But before Alex could read further, the lights in the storage room flickered. A shadow moved. Someone was watching him. Alex's heart pounded. The dim storage room, filled with dusty Hollywood relics, suddenly felt like a trap. Someone was there, watching. He gripped the script tightly. Clint Eastwood's final Western, The Last Ride, was in his hands, the story that had been erased from history. Then, a slow, deliberate set of footsteps. Alex turned. A tall man in a trench coat and a cowboy hat stepped into the light. His face was shadowed, but the voice was calm, commanding. "You found something that ain't yours, kid." Alex's grip on the script tightened. "Who are you?" The man took another step forward. His eyes, sharp and knowing, locked onto Alex, someone who used to ride with the legend, and someone who knows when to let ghosts rest. The words sent a chill through Alex. Ride with the legend? Was he talking about Clint? "What is this movie? Why was it buried?" Alex demanded. The man sighed, almost like he wasn't sure whether to answer. But then he spoke. Clint Eastwood wasn't just making a Western. He was saying goodbye. The man walked over to the dusty shelves, running a gloved hand over an old film reel. Clint always said movies should be more than just stories. They should be a man's truth. And this one? This was his truth. Alex looked down at the script. The aging gunslinger, Sam Colton, was clearly a stand-in for Clint himself, a man who had spent his life walking the fine line between justice and regret. In the story, Sam had one last mission, not to kill, not to fight, but to set things right before he faded into the West. And the most shocking twist? At the end of the script, Sam Colton didn't survive. Alex swallowed hard. Clint had written his own ending, a final farewell. "Clint was saying something with this film, wasn't he?" Alex asked. The man in the hat nodded. "Yeah, but he realized some stories are too real, some truths are too painful." He turned, tipping his hat slightly. "That's why he buried it, and maybe you should too." Then he was gone. Alex wasn't about to let this go. He took the script, rushed home, and read it in one sitting. Every page was a mirror to Clint's life, his triumphs, his regrets, the battles he had fought, not just on screen, but in real life. But one passage, scrawled in the margins in Clint's own handwriting, made Alex's breath catch. "A man ain't measured by the bullets he's fired, but by the hearts he's changed." Alex closed the script. This wasn't just Clint Eastwood's last movie. It was his final lesson. But if Clint himself had buried it, should Alex bring it back? And more importantly, was someone willing to stop him if he did? Alex didn't sleep that night. He sat at his desk, the script spread out before him, reading Clint Eastwood's last untold story. The more he read, the more it felt like Clint was speaking directly to him. It wasn't just a Western. It was a confession. The story of Sam Colton. The Last Ride, Clint's character, Sam Colton, wasn't a hero, at least not in the way Hollywood had always painted him. He was old, tired, a man haunted by the choices he had made. He had spent his life living by the gun, believing in justice, but in the end, he had to ask himself, did I really make a difference, or did I just survive? Now, in the story, a young outlaw had come looking for him, not for revenge, but for answers. And here's where the twist hit Alex hard. The young outlaw in the story? He was a stand-in for Clint's own past self. The movie wasn't about an old cowboy riding into the sunset. It was about Clint Eastwood facing his own past, and that's why the studio had shut it down. Hollywood didn't want to see its toughest cowboy vulnerable. Alex started digging deeper. He searched through old interviews, production notes, anything that might explain why the film never saw the light of day. Then, buried in an old newspaper clipping, he found it. Eastwood abandons final Western project. Studio calls it incomplete. But Clint's own words were what mattered. "A man knows when his ride is over. This wasn't a story I wanted to tell. Not yet." Alex sat back. Clint had finished the movie, but he chose not to release it. But why? What had made Clint Eastwood, the legend, the last real cowboy of cinema, bury his own masterpiece? That's when Alex noticed something strange. The film wasn't just erased from Hollywood, it was being erased from history. Emails were deleted. Records disappeared. Someone didn't just want this movie forgotten, they wanted it gone forever, and Alex was starting to realize they might come for him next. Alex Carter had stumbled onto something far bigger than he ever imagined. Clint Eastwood's lost film wasn't just hidden, it was erased, and someone was making sure it stayed that way. A ghost story in Hollywood. Alex had spent years studying Hollywood's lost films, but this was different. Every trace of the last ride had been wiped out. No studio records, no press releases, not even rumors among old stuntmen and crew members. It was as if Clint Eastwood's final masterpiece never existed. But Clint didn't just abandon projects. Something had happened. And Alex was starting to think. Someone forced him to walk away. Determined to find answers, Alex tracked down an old Warner Brothers executive, Frank Delano. Frank had worked with Clint for years before retiring. If anyone knew the truth, it was him. Alex found him at a quiet diner in Los Angeles. The old man looked tired, but when Alex mentioned The Last Ride, his face went white. "That movie never should have been made," Frank muttered. "Why?" Alex pressed. Frank sighed. He looked around, as if making sure no one was listening. Clint was telling a story too close to home. It wasn't just about a cowboy, it was about him, his regrets, the battles he fought off-screen. Alex nodded. He had figured that much out. But why would the studio shut it down? Frank hesitated. Then, in a hushed voice, he said, "Because Clint was ready to reveal something Hollywood didn't want out there. Something about how the system works, how legends like him get used up and tossed aside." Alex's hands clenched under the table. "You mean Hollywood was afraid of what he'd say?" Frank nodded. Clint always played by his own rules. But this time, he was about to break the biggest one. Alex swallowed hard. Clint's final Western wasn't just a goodbye, it was an exposé. As Alex left the diner, his mind raced. Clint Eastwood had been silenced, not because his film was bad, but because it was too real. But just as Alex reached his car, his phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging. You're playing with fire." A cold shiver ran down his spine. This wasn't just about a lost movie anymore. Someone was watching him, and they were ready to bury the truth, again. But Alex had already made his decision. He wasn't backing down. Alex Carter stared at the message on his phone. "Stop digging. You're playing with fire." Someone knew he was getting too close to the truth. Too close to uncovering why Clint Eastwood's final masterpiece had been erased. But instead of fear, Alex felt something else. Determination. Whoever was trying to silence him was scared, and that meant he was onto something big. Alex knew he couldn't go to the police. This was Hollywood's dark side. So he did what any good researcher would do. He dug deeper. Through old film logs, he found 3 key crew members who had worked on The Last Ride before it was shut down. But when he tried to contact them, all 3 had vanished. Director of photography, Carl Mendez, retired early. No interviews, no trace. Editor, Sarah Klein, moved overseas. No public records after 2015. Lead stuntman, Jimmy O'Rourke, dead. Car accident. Alex's blood ran cold. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had systematically erased every person involved in the film, except one. There was still one name left. Mason Rourke, Clint's closest friend and stunt double. If anyone knew the truth, it was him. Alex tracked Mason Rourke down to a small ranch in Arizona. It wasn't easy. The man had disappeared from Hollywood years ago, but when Alex finally found him, Mason wasn't surprised. "I figured someone would come looking one day," Mason said, staring out at the desert. Alex showed him the script. Clint Eastwood's final, lost story. Mason ran his fingers over the yellowed pages. His face darkened. "Damn fool never could let things rest," he muttered. "You were there, weren't you?" Alex asked. Mason nodded. "Yeah, kid, I was there. I saw everything." Then, in a quiet, gravelly voice, he told Alex the truth. Clint was tired, Mason began, not just of Hollywood, of everything. He wanted to make a movie that meant something. Alex listened intently. It wasn't about shootouts or revenge. It was about a man coming to terms with his own past, his own sins. Mason's hands tightened into fists, and that scared the hell out of the studio. Alex frowned. Why? Because it was personal? Mason shook his head. Because Clint wasn't just telling his story. He was telling Hollywood's story, about the lies, the betrayals, the way the system chews up men like him and spits them out. Alex felt a chill. So they shut it down? Mason exhaled slowly. No, kid, they did worse. Clint finished the movie, Mason said. He poured his soul into it, but before he could release it, the studio pulled the rug out from under him. Alex leaned in. What do you mean? Mason's eyes darkened. They stole his movie, took the reels, cut it to pieces. Then they told him, if he ever tried to release it, they'd bury his whole damn legacy. The truth hit Alex like a bullet. Clint hadn't walked away. He had been forced to. The man who had built his career playing the lone gunslinger, the unbreakable outlaw, had finally been beaten. Alex sat in stunned silence. Clint Eastwood didn't abandon his final film. Hollywood stole it from him. They had taken The Last Ride, the story that was meant to be his farewell, his truth, and buried it. Alex's hands shook as he flipped through the script. Did Clint fight back? He asked Mason Rourke, the stuntman who had been by Eastwood's side for decades. Mason gave a bitter chuckle. You ever seen a wounded lion, kid? He said. Still strong, still proud, but deep down he knows he's already lost the fight. Alex swallowed hard. They broke him? Mason exhaled, staring at the horizon. Not in the way you think. Clint wasn't scared of losing money, fame, or even his legacy. He was scared of something worse, being forgotten. And the studio threatened him with exactly that. Alex's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Mason turned to him. They told him, let this movie die, or we erase you. Erase Clint Eastwood? The thought sent a shiver down Alex's spine. Could a man that legendary really be wiped from history? Mason took a deep breath. The studio didn't just take the movie. They destroyed the original cut. Every frame, every reel, gone. Alex's heart pounded. But that's impossible. There's always a backup. Mason hesitated. Maybe, he said. Or maybe Clint was smarter than all of them. Alex frowned. What do you mean? Mason's eyes locked onto his. You think a man like Clint Eastwood would let them take his greatest work without a fight? Alex sat forward. You're saying he hid it? Mason didn't answer right away, but a small, knowing smirk crossed his lips. I'm saying, if you really want to find Clint's last great Western, you're going to have to do more than dig through old records. The missing film wasn't lost. It was hidden, and Alex knew one thing for certain. He was going to find it. Alex Carter's pulse pounded. Clint Eastwood didn't just lose his last movie. He hid it. Mason Rourke, Clint's closest friend and stunt double, had practically spelled it out. Somewhere out there, a secret copy of The Last Ride still existed. And if Alex could find it, he wouldn't just uncover Clint Eastwood's greatest untold story. He'd expose Hollywood's biggest cover-up. Alex retraced his steps, searching for any hint of where Clint might have stashed a copy of the film. Then it hit him. Clint always worked with one editor, Sarah Klein. She had vanished after the film was shut down. What if she had the last surviving copy? Alex dug through old interviews, industry contacts, anything that might lead him to Sarah. After hours of searching, he found it. A P.O. box in Montana. No address, no phone number, but it was the only lead he had, so he packed his bags and drove. Straight into the heart of Clint Eastwood's last mystery. Alex found Sarah Klein living in a cabin deep in the Montana wilderness. She didn't look surprised when he knocked on her door. "Took you long enough," she said, ushering him inside. The place was filled with film canisters, old editing machines, a lost world of Hollywood history. Alex didn't waste time. "Do you have it?" he asked. Sarah studied him. "Do you even know what it is?" Alex exhaled. "Clint's last film, the real one? The one they tried to erase?" She nodded slowly. Then she walked over to a dusty wooden crate. She pulled off the lid. And there it was, the lost film reel of The Last Ride, Clint Eastwood's final masterpiece. Untouched. But just as Alex reached for the reel, the cabin lights cut out. Outside, the sound of car engines. Sarah's face turned pale. "They found us," she whispered. Alex's breath caught. He had spent too much time digging. Hollywood's gatekeepers weren't going to let this movie resurface. And now they were coming to erase it. For good. Alex Carter stood frozen as the low growl of engines echoed through the Montana wilderness. Headlights beamed through the trees, casting long shadows against the cabin walls. Sarah Klein clutched the film reel, the only surviving copy of Clint Eastwood's last Western. "We have to move." "Now," she whispered. Alex peeked through the window. 3 black SUVs had pulled up. Men in suits stepped out, their movements sharp, deliberate. Hollywood's enforcers weren't here to negotiate. They were here to make sure The Last Ride never saw the light of day. And if Alex and Sarah got in the way, they'd be buried along with it. Sarah grabbed a duffel bag from under the floorboards. "There's a back exit through the barn," she said. "If we make it to my truck, we might have a chance." Alex nodded, adrenaline surging through his veins. They bolted for the back door. Footsteps crunched outside. Voices. "Don't let them leave." Sarah shoved the reel into the bag and sprinted toward the barn. Alex followed. Crash! The front door splintered open. A deep voice growled, "You should have left this alone." Gunshot. A warning. Alex didn't wait to see if the next one was real. He sprinted. Sarah's truck roared to life just as Alex dove into the passenger seat. The men rushed forward. But Sarah floored it. Tires spun in the mud. The truck fishtailed, barely dodging a black SUV that tried to block the path. They were being hunted. Headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. The SUVs gave chase. "They won't stop," Sarah said, gripping the wheel. "Not until they're sure this film is dead?" Alex knew she was right. There was only one way to end this. They couldn't just escape. They had to expose the truth. "Do you have a laptop?" Alex asked. Sarah nodded. "In the back seat." Alex grabbed it, heart racing. He had an idea. He connected Sarah's laptop to her truck's Wi-Fi and opened a cloud server. "If we can't release the film physically..." Sarah's eyes widened. "We leak it online." Alex nodded. They weren't just running. They were fighting back. As Sarah swerved down the dark mountain road, Alex uploaded Clint Eastwood's final film, every frame, every scene. The lost masterpiece was about to go public. Sarah gritted her teeth, pushing the truck to its limits. The SUVs behind them weren't giving up. "We just need a little more time," Alex shouted, eyes locked on the screen, but time was running out. Ahead, a roadblock, two black cars parked across the dirt road, their drivers stepping out. "They're gonna cut us off," Sarah growled. Alex's heart pounded. Then, an idea. "Keep driving straight." Sarah's eyes widened. "That's suicide." "Trust me," Alex said. She hit the gas. The SUVs behind them sped up. The men in front raised their weapons. And just before impact, Alex yanked the steering wheel. The truck veered off-road, kicking up dirt, barely squeezing through the gap between the roadblock and the trees. They made it, but behind them, a crash. One of the chasing SUVs couldn't stop in time. It plowed into the roadblock. That gave them just enough time. Upload 92%. Minutes later, Sarah's truck screeched to a stop outside a small radio station on the outskirts of town. It was empty. Perfect. They ran inside, carrying the laptop. Alex plugged it into the station's satellite connection, boosting the signal. The upload jumped to 99%, then 100%. It was done. Clint Eastwood's final movie, the film they tried to erase, was now out in the world. A masterpiece hidden for years had finally been set free. Hollywood couldn't bury it anymore. That night, millions of notifications lit up across the internet. Breaking leaked, Clint Eastwood film shocks. Hollywood, the last ride. A lost masterpiece. Resurfaces. How did they hide this for so long? The world watched, and they saw the truth. Clint Eastwood's last film wasn't just a Western, it was a farewell letter, a story about a legendary gunslinger facing the twilight of his life, standing up against the corruption of the very system that once made him famous. It was Clint's own story, and now, no one could erase it. Weeks later, the studio tried to suppress the film. They failed. Fans demanded its release. Critics called it Eastwood's greatest work. And somewhere, in the quiet of his old ranch, an aging Clint Eastwood watched. He smiled. Guess the old dog had one last fight left in him after all. Legends never die. The end.